talking to Jim Mallon, who not many people really know about it, and although he does have many important jobs in MST3000.
This is the galley where all the fresh pots of coffee are made daily.
Why don't you introduce yourself to the folks at home?
I'm Kevin Murphy. I'm the voice of Tom Servo.
Tom Servo was actually dead, and so we had to bring him back with the robot defibrillator here. Doesn't really work. But, you know, nobody knows that. It's just a TV show.
So do you like the job so far? I mean, has it been really great for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a great job. I mean, I was never a good student in school, and the teachers always say, Frank, you know, what do you think you're going to do? Grow up and get a job where you watch TV all day? No,
I have to ask you, gentlemen, I mean, do you find it easy to work together? I mean, how long have you all been working together professionally?
I met Kevin when he was on the set of My New Mom, which was a series that CBS was working on.
Oh, this is a great. Larry, Snodie, have some questions for me?
Yeah, Tom.
Oh, should I bow down and answer every single cute and clever critical type question you have for me?
Have you ever had trouble with censors about dickweed?
No, because what does dickweed mean?
That's the thing.
See, nobody knows.
Okay.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Lawrence Snodie here in this interview, and I'm sitting here at the Pabst Theater, and right now I'm talking to Mary Jo Pehl. How are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you? I'm
doing fantastic, and I'm just thrilled to be here, being able to talk to the cast of some of my favorite shows. You know, let's talk about your starting out period. Originally in college, you were thinking about going into nursing. Yes. What made you take the turn from nursing into comedy?
Well, when I realized that my conception of a nursing career was actually me reenacting scenes from Medical Center and other medical dramas, I thought that's what nursing life would be like. And then I realized that, yeah, and I don't really like the sight of blood, so maybe that's not a wise choice.
And a lot more bedpans than you thought.
Yeah, well, exactly, which they don't show you on, St. Elsewhere.
Well, now on Cinematic Titanic, and I'm not sure about MST3K, you were basically the only female in the cast and on the show. Was there a different perspective to that? Did the guys treat you differently because you're the only female, or were you just one of the guys?
Well, on Mystery Science Theater, there was also Bridget Jones, who was a part-time writer, and Colleen Henjum, who worked in the California office and would send in her scripts. And it's hard to say how the guys treated me because we'd all done stand-up together, so we were old friends, and you don't really know what people's motivations are when they treat you or how they treat you. So I would be loath to say, oh, you're responding to me because I'm a woman, but it was all those guys are still very dear friends of mine, and it definitely had a male energy to it. I learned more about the male species in those 7 years than I had in my entire life.
Do you think that reverse, that they learn more about the female species because of working with you?
Well, yeah, I'm sure when Bridget and I were in the writing room that, yes, I'm sure they got an education too. And I mean, we were all, the writing room was this really great convivial atmosphere where a lot of it was very conversational. So you not only learned about, different perspectives, but different people's different viewpoints and expertise in different areas.
Well, now, with Cinematic Titanic is more of a artist-owned venture. All of you have a piece of it, and you all own, and you have a stake in it. When you're writing material, do you self-censor because of it? I mean, is it more of a hindrance or a help to you with the jokes, with the riffs?
Oh, I don't know. That's a really good question. I think what it does is, having done this for many years, I have more of a sense of what's going to work and what's not going to work. So maybe I self-censor that way. Okay. Things we can and cannot do on stage or choose not to. Secondly, I think that I'm much more invested in the joke. I have to go to the mat for it if I really believe in it, because I am a partner in this endeavor.
Right. Okay. Well, you're one of the few cast members, I think maybe even the only cast member that has worked with Cinematic Titanic and Riff Tracks. What were the differences between the two experiences?
I think with Riff Tracks, I'm trying to remember, it was a lot of, if you can believe it, it was even more long distance writing. And I worked with Bill Corbett on the, what's the one I did with Bill Corbett? I can't remember.
I want to say Riff Tracks, X-Files.
X-Files, yeah. And I went to Minneapolis, where I'm from, and I live in Austin now, so we worked on it there and recorded it there. And I went to San Diego for Glitter. So, and then Mike and I did a lot of writing once I was in San Diego. So I guess it was more face-to-face than Cinematic Titanic is.
All right. Now, you've actually written a book. Actually, this is technically your second book, but we won't talk about the first one.
We don't speak of the first one.
We don't even mention the title. But but your second book, Employee of the Month and Other Big Things, is Other Big Deals. I'm sorry. Thank you so much. I love being corrected on my show.
You're looking for it on Amazon, which I'm sure you are.
Which you should be, yes. You self-published the book. Was there a reason why you decided to self-publish instead of going with a major company?
Yeah, because I had sent out dozens and dozens of queries to publishers and agents, and everyone was really interested. I had a really solid proposal. People were really interested in my background, knowing that there was already some interest from fans, you know, and it would come this close to getting something with them, and this went on for many years. You know, people would love it. We love you. We think you're great. And then ultimately it would come down to, but books of essays are hard to sell, which, okay, I guess that's, you know, the way it is, but I didn't want to let them determine what I was going to do. And as I explain in the book, it's kind of an opportunity, a do-over of my first book. It's like I had to, you know, set things right because that first book was not what I wanted it to be. And I didn't want it to be in other people's hands, you know? And when I realized, I finally got the bright idea of, oh, I should just self-publish it.
I was about to say, so you basically did it because self-publishing, you had more creative control.
Exactly, yes.
When you
Thank you for doing my interview for me.
I was about to say, I'm like, wow. When you, oh man, we're gonna have to edit so much stuff. No, we're just gonna let it run through. We believe in honesty, and we even put out the flubs that we do on the thing. So I'm just I'm gonna just read the next question. When you wrote about your family in the book, there was a lot of personal stories, or not, well, I won't say a lot, but there are quite a few personal stories where we get to know about you and your family. Did you check with anybody to say, hey, I'm going to write about this story, is this okay with you? Or did you just kind of know that they were going to be okay with it? Or was it just it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to get permission?
Well, I don't think there's anything in those stories that anyone in my family took offense at, and I'm curious to know what you're thinking.
About your sister losing...
Yeah. I write a story about my sister losing a child, and she knows. I'm not sure she's ever read that story, but she knows about the story. Okay. And I like that story a lot, and I don't think it's negative, if you will.
Well, no, I didn't think it was negative either, but it's still a real
subject. It's a touchy subject, absolutely. But there are a lot of theories about memoir-style writing and what you get to write about. And I only wrote my story. Like, I'm not writing my sister's story. I'm writing my story about that, my piece about that. And I actually think she's absolutely fine with it, you know. And I write about my parents, and everything I write about my parents, I have teased them about. We have a great relationship that way. And plus, my mom is so great because she's like, you know, you could write that she's, you know, a drug-addled kitty killer. And she would be like, oh, Mary Jo wrote about me. You have to see what Mary Jo wrote about me. You know, they're really great that way. They get it. You know, they have a great spirit that way. So.
Are you looking to do any more books?
Yeah, I have a couple in the pipeline with some collaborations with people.
I know that you still do stand up once in a while.
Once in a while.
Yeah, and you also do a segment on NPR once in a while.
Can I interrupt you right
Sure,
now?
go ahead.
I wouldn't say I do stand-up. I do storytelling, and it's not club work.
It's not club work. It's not jokes. It's
Yeah,
getting up
it's
and
more
telling.
storytelling. It's more
Almost
based
like a
on the
one-woman show.
Solo-y, yeah.
Okay. Well, I apologize for the misnomer then.
No,
you know.
no need to apologize. It's like, it's hard, those delineations are hard to make sometimes.
Well, you go out and tell stories to audiences that are willing.
I stand up on a stage in front of people, so yes, I
Yes.
still do that, yes.
There you go. You also do a segment for NPR.
Yeah.
You do Cinematic Titanic, and I'm sure you've got lots of other things in the work. How do you make the time for everything? How do you prioritize everything? This needs to be done now.
You know, I don't, and I still feel like I could be more disciplined that way. I'm really deadline oriented. When something comes down the pipe and I have to have something done, I know that that's the first priority. And Cinematic Titanic is always the first priority because other people's schedules are dependent on it. You know, if we have a deadline, we're premiering this piece in July, then we got to write it. So I'm still working on it, to answer your question.
One last question. You've been part of Mst3K. You've been part of Cinematic Titanic, and you have all these fans, the ones that buy your books, that buy the DVDs, and they come to these shows like this. How, after all these, well, I can't say all these years because that makes everybody feel old, but after this longevity of time, how do you feel about the legacy of Mst3K and Cinematic Titanic, that you're still able to do this and the fans are still there?
Yeah, I don't, it kind of blows my mind. And when I was doing Mystery Science Theater, I never took it for granted because it was such a wild, unique job. I mean, who has a job like that? And I was working really hard in the comedy scene, but a lot of success in showbiz, even cable showbiz that Mystery Science Theater was, is really a lot of luck, you know? So I feel really blessed that way. I mean, I really worked my ass off for it, and I was really lucky to be part of that team. And then to get this opportunity with Cinematic Titanic is doubly amazing because it's people that I adore. We have a gas doing it, and I don't think I'm answering your question because I'm not sure I know the answer. It is everyone who comes through the autograph line or sends an email thanking us for shows. I want to say thank you for letting us do this. And doing it live is such a different experience that we all dig it so much, and we're so lucky, and we love that you guys love it. Did I even come close to answering your question?
Well, let's just say this: you feel blessed.
Yeah. Well, blessed isn't a word I really
Not okay. Understood.
I'm a lucky girl.
Lucky.
I'm a lucky girl.
Lucky girl.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to be your nickname now, Lucky Girl. But we thank you so much for your
My
time.
pleasure.
I greatly
Thank you.
appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Snodie, Mary Jo Peel. You have your own website. I'm sorry, please. You have your own website. What is the website?
mjpeel.com, mjpehl.com.
And also cinematictitanic.com.
Mm-hmm.
So, thank you so much.
You're
We
welcome.
greatly
Thank
appreciate
you.
the time. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Snodie, Mary Jo Peel. We'll be back soon. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Snodie here, and I'm sitting next to J. Elvis Weinstein, originally known as Dr. Lawrence Earnhardt. How do I pronounce that?
It was Earhart.
Earhart. Dr. Lawrence Earhart from Mystery Science Theater 3000. And now he is also on Cinematic Titanic, and we're very proud to have him here today. How are you today, sir?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
Now, one of the things, I want to talk a little bit about your beginning, because I'm actually fascinated by this. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Snodie here, and I'm sitting next to J. Elvis Weinstein, originally known as Dr. Lawrence Earnhardt. How do I pronounce that?
It was Earhart.
Earhart. Dr. Lawrence Earhart from Mystery Science Theater 3000. And now he is also on Cinematic Titanic, and we're very proud to have him here today. How are you today, sir?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
Now, one of the things, I want to talk a little bit about your beginning, because I'm actually fascinated by this. You, like most of the rest of the cast of Mst3K, started out as a stand-up comedian, but you started so young. I mean, how old were you, and what made you decide that comedy was the way to go for you?
I was 15 when I started doing stand-up in Minneapolis, and I never had a grand plan. A friend of mine decided he was going to do an open stage night in Minneapolis, and I decided, all right, I'll tag along. And I wrote an act like a couple of hours before I went on stage, and by the end of the night, I knew that was my thing.
Well, being 15 years old, I believe you said, was it hard to get gigs? I mean, you really can't walk into a lot of clubs nowadays under 18.
Right. Well, luckily the place I actually started didn't have a liquor license, so I was allowed to perform there underage. But by the time I was 16, I was working all over the city and all over the Midwest, doing in bars, and I didn't really look my age, and I didn't talk about it on stage. So mostly I just sort of skated by, but I had become enough of an established part of the Minneapolis comic community that people just sort of let me roll.
So you were basically 21 when you were 15.
Pretty much.
All right, I understand that. I can relate to that. How did you get the gig on Mst3K when it started at KTMA?
Well, a bunch of stand-ups in town, including Trace and eventually Joel Hodgson. We had a weekly writing group where we would just sort of dump our stand-up notebooks on each other and see if anyone had any ideas for a funny tagline or a funny way to go with a premise or a joke. And so I knew Joel already. Joel, right when I started doing stand-up, Joel sort of came back from his self-imposed hiatus and taught a class in creativity and stand-up, and I enrolled in that because I was a fan of Joel's from his stand-up career.
Right.
And so Joel and I had built a relationship over those couple of years, and then he joined that writing group, and then one day after the writing group, he just kind of pulled Trace and I aside and said, hey, I'm doing this thing tomorrow, do you want to run puppets for me? And that was kind of the beginning of it.
And that just kind of took off from there. Yeah. Now, you were originally 3 characters on the show. I mean, besides Dr. Lawrence, wow, I'm going to learn to not pronounce that sometime today. You were also Tom Servo, which a lot of people knew, but not a lot of people knew that you were also Gypsy at the beginning.
I was. I created Tom Servo and Gypsy as characters, and I even was Crow once on the local TV show when Trace was out of town. I threw in a few Crow lines. Yeah.
Oh wow! Okay, you're just an all-about man about town, aren't you?
That's right. But when we moved to national TV, Jim Mallon took the Gypsy puppet.
Was that something that you relinquished happily, or is it just kind of like, I'm kind of close to that character, but okay?
I probably did. I don't remember specifically. I probably didn't relinquish it gladly, but it, in my memory, it was fine, and it allowed Servo and Gypsy to be in the same scene.
Well, you've only lasted 1 year on Comedy Central before you decided to take off for greener pastures. Or did you ever watch other episodes later on and think, oh, there's somebody else doing the character now, and I miss that, or that voice doesn't really match what I think of the character? Or?
No, I mean, the reality of it was sunk in immediately, really. So the thing that did strike me actually is how great Frank was, and how great Frank and Trace were together. And my chops as a comic actor at 17 weren't what I would hope what I would want them to be now. So to see, so the one thing that was clear to me is that Frank and Trace were a great comedy team, whereas Trace and I, we had some chemistry, but it really went up a notch with Frank in that role.
Well, but you seem to do all right for yourself after you left Mst3K. I mean, you've got, at least writing credit-wise and stuff, you've got head writer for later with Greg Kinnear, head writer on America's Funniest Videos. Oh, how did you get those gigs? First of all, I mean, who approached you, or did you approach somebody else going, hey, I can do this?
Well, I mean, every gig was different. I mean, I moved to Los Angeles when I was 20, and, I knew people who were already writing for television, and so it's a process of getting scripts to various people, sample material, and then getting an agent, and so every job had a sort of, sometimes it was just a job interview for a writing job, sometimes it was a friend was already on the show and they recommended me, so, but, pretty standard Hollywood channels. I got an agent and got gigs.
Well, the thing is when you were writing with Mst3K and even with AFV, it's a weekly show. But when you were doing later with Greg Kinnear, that's a nightly show. Right. Was there a huge change of writing styles on that? I mean, there's got to be more challenges doing a nightly show than there is a weekly show.
Well, it's very different. Doing a daily show there's a sort of factory job element to it, you know, because you start writing it in the morning and you shoot it at the end of the day, and then it's nothing you can do, you know.
Right.
So each day is a new show. There's not carryover from week to, you know, there's no baggage of, you know, when you're working on an episodic show, you have a bunch of episodes that are in various states of production, you know. So there's a lot that you're sort of dragging along through the chain, whereas on a daily show, it's really like that day's show is what's important. Right. Get it done, go home, don't take any of it home with you and you mentally, and then start again early the next morning.
When you were working on AFV, you also started working again with Trace.
I did.
Was there any trepidation with that, or did you always keep in contact and you were always friends, or?
No, we were actually kind of estranged for several years, and then when Trace moved to Los Angeles, he got in touch with me, and we chatted and worked out any old issues very quickly, and then I actually hired him for America's Funniest Home Videos because I was the head writer on the show. So
now you're back, and all the fans can see you on Cinematic Titanic now. How did this happen? How did you get back into movie riffing?
Well, before this happened, Trace and Joel and I had been talking about doing various projects together, and we went out and pitched a show together and stuff. And so we were already sort of in that mindset of kind of getting the band back together. Right. And then Joel actually came to me with the idea for Cinematic Titanic, and it was right at the time when the Writers Guild went on strike. So I had nothing else I even could do, so I was very up for it, and we shot one DVD and performed live shortly thereafter, and realized that we really like doing this, and we still have a thing doing it, and we just didn't stop, and it's been almost 5 years now.
Okay. Well, now that you're going out and you're doing this as a live show, and you do the meet and greets before or after the show, depending on where you are, how does it feel to have all these fans come up and remember you and enjoy what you're doing now?
It's really lovely. I mean, it's you know, to think that, you know, I certainly, you know, I think, you know, most of the fans, I'm sort of a secondary level fandom for them, I think. You know,
for some people, yes.
And I'm not saying that's self-deprecating. It's just the reality. Most people didn't see the show when I was even on it, and, you know, came in season 3, or when as Comedy Channel became wider distributed, more people saw the show, but they probably, you know, first got acquainted with it with Kevin as Servo and Frank as TV's Frank, and but I'm really proud that I was part of starting this thing, you know, and that we made this thing that means so much to so many people, and that it lives 20-some years later in people's hearts, and now very much alive on stage in a slightly different form.
Well, if anybody wants to be able to get in contact with you through email or even postal mail, like a P.O. box, is there any way that people can reach out to you and say congratulations or thank you? Or
the best way is on Twitter at J. Elvis Weinstein, all one word. Okay. At Jelvis Weinstein, it reads.
Well, you know, Mr. Weinstein, we really appreciate the time that you took to spend with us, and believe it or not, I appreciated your character.
Well,
I appreciated your writing.
I don't feel unappreciated.
Okay.
I just am realistic.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And we're looking forward to having a fun time tonight, and if you ever want to catch a show, you got to go to cinematictitanic.com, and you can learn more about what he's doing with them too. Indeed. But thank you so much for your time. We wish you great success.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Snodie, J. Elvis Weinstein. One of us will be back. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Larry Snodie. I'm sitting here with Trace Ballou from Mystery Science Theater 3000, Freaks and Geeks, and now Cinematic Titanics. We're very happy to have you here. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for being here. It's great to be in Milwaukee at the Pabst, the beautiful Pabst Theater. You can't say enough about this place.
Well, I mean, from what I understand, every time you come to Milwaukee, you're pretty much always at the Pabst Theater. This is like your home in Milwaukee.
It is now. It's our home. We have cots set up here and nice facility downstairs. They cater for us. It's beautiful.
Well, home away from home is always a good thing. One of the things I try to do when I do these interviews is I try to find something personal about the person so I can ask them. I mean, nothing too big, nothing too personal, but just something that I can go, oh, about your dog Petey. You know,
Yeah.
I can't find any information about you at all. Are you normally such a private person? Is it why?
Well, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Minneapolis, so I guess there's just naturally this Nordic shield of info. Any personal info is I don't know why it isn't out there.
I can't even find a bio of you anywhere.
I think there's one on our website, but nobody looks at it anyway, so you have to go someplace else.
And what website is that?
That's cinematictitanic.com.
Ah, okay. Well, that seems to stand to reason since it's Cinematic Titanic that we're seeing here tonight.
Yeah, that's right.
Of course, a lot of people don't accuse me of using reason in anything I do, so.
You shouldn't have to. That's just a waste of time.
Now, you were one of the originals of Mst3K there from the beginning, from the KTMA series. Was it, when you looked at the script and when you were doing it, actually you did a lot of stuff ad-libbed, did you always know it was going to be a special show, or was it just something that was putting a little bit of money in your pocket?
A very tiny amount of money in our pocket, and it was a lark. It was something fun to do, and it was great hanging with everybody. And Joel and Josh and I were friends already, and so it was just a continuation of hanging out, either in comedy clubs or in writing groups. And it was just never thought we'd still be talking about it. 25, not coming up soon on 25. Yeah.
Well, actually, we'll be asking a little bit about that, about the legacy of Mst3K in just a few moments. I kind of want to walk through the history a little bit. You were Dr. Clayton Forrester, and you were also Crow. Tell us a little bit about how you came with the character of Dr. Clayton Forrester. Was there an inspiration behind that?
Well, the name, of course, we ripped off wholesale from War of the Worlds. Right. Gene Barry's character, which was just on cable last night, War of the Worlds. Still a really great movie, but it was a good doctor name, Dr. Clayton Forrester. And if you watch that film, they use his full title almost every time they talk about him. Oh, that's Dr. Clayton Forrester. It's like, what would Dr. Clayton Forrester think? So it was just one of those kind of, it rolled off the tongue nice, and it fit perfectly.
Well, what about Crow? He's kind of a wiseacre. How did you come up with a character for him?
I think, that's kind of my nature too, is to be kind of a counterpunchy sort of wiseacre-y thing. And we didn't go in with a Bible that said, these are what the characters are and this is what they're like. They emerged from us and evolved over time. So it's Josh put into Servo his personal quirks and things, and I did that with Crow, and they just evolved from there.
Well, you were with Mystery Science Theater 3K for 7 years, I think it was?
I think 7 seasons with the channel, right. And then the KTMA was a season.
Right.
So,
8
yeah.
seasons.
Yeah, and then we had a little break in there. We did the movie, and so I don't know how many years total.
Well, a good chunk of your life.
Yes, it was a dark period, yes.
Dark period of your life, okay. You ended up leaving Mst3K. You were also on Freaks and Geeks as a semi-reoccurring character. Did someone approach you to be on that show, or?
Yeah, Paul Feig. I'd met Paul through Joel out in Los Angeles, and Josh and Paul and I worked on a show called Fast Food Films. We worked on the pilot for that. Okay. Was taking old movies, bad movies, and cutting them down to 7-minute chunks and then making something else out of them, like a commercial or something like that.
Okay.
And I knew Paul, and he called me up and said, hey, we're doing this show, and Josh is a writer on it, and some other guys I knew, and why don't you come over and play this teacher? He's a biology teacher. And I went, wow, I don't want to wreck your show, but I'd love to. That's great. And then they just kept bringing me back. I kept coming back as this biology teacher.
Okay, so you didn't want to wreck their show, but you had a guest appearance on West Wing, and you had no qualms about that?
It was such a tiny, tiny little part and that was a lark too. My friend Bill Johnson, who was the editor on the Mystery Science movie, was the director of that episode, and he just said, hey, come on, maybe you can read this line. It's just a harmless little thing.
So it's a one-off.
Yeah, it was so much fun, and that show was so rich. It was a network, the prime, of its lifespan, and
so catering was awesome.
I don't remember catering, but I got tailored. For my one line, I had a suit, and I went in and they tailored. It was like, I'm barely on camera, but they treated me great, and it was awesome.
That's actually great. I know that you actually wrote a comic book. I believe it was for Event Comics called Here Come the Big People. Was writing a comic book something that you always wanted to do? Were you ever a fan of comics, or did they just come approach you and say, "Hey, we'd like to have you do this"?
They approached me. I have a fairly embarrassingly large collection of comics at home, but but really, they approached me, and they had been doing these great titles like Painkiller Jane and Ash, which was their fireman superhero character, which was pretty cool. And they said, "Hey, let's do this thing." And at the time, I didn't want to do a super violent comic or put too much sex into it or make it interesting in any way. So it's a pretty milquetoasty kind of storyline. But now I've got another comic that I'm working on that is super violent, extremely gratuitous, very gross. It's a perfect 14-year-old boy comic book.
Okay, do we already have a release company with that?
No.
Do you have a title for the book?
No, I have to. It's called Perfect Future Man.
Perfect Future Man.
And but no, I'd like to find a publisher, but I might have to do it myself.
Is there a way to still get the Here Come the Big People comic? Is it, except for back issue bins, or?
No, I have a few left. I think I have about 100 left, and then they're gone.
Wow.
But I just saw on Twitter that Amanda Palmer, who did art for the book, there's something featured in her book, The Art of Amanda Palmer. So, and that's only rumor through Twitter.
Okay.
I haven't seen it, but
Yeah, but say take it for what it's worth.
yeah.
You're here now with Cinematic Titanic. I'm sorry, actually, I wanted to ask you about America's Funniest Videos, where you started working again with J. Elvis. Was there any trepidation going to work for him, since technically he would be your boss now?
No, it was great. We'd known each other for such a long time, and there was another example where he called up and said, "Hey, I'm doing this show, and you've made fun of movies and mocked video. Why don't you come over and do this?" And it turned out to be a great job. I did that for, I think, 9 seasons.
Wow.
So
I did not know it was that long.
Oh yeah, steady job in Los Angeles. It was fantastic.
So what gets you back into doing doing movie riffing? And now with Cinematic Titanic.
Oh, you can't get the stink off you. It just trails behind you. It's just, you can't get rid of it. Joel and Josh and I were pitching a different idea, direct-to-video concept in Los Angeles, and we wanted to work together again, and there was the opportunity to get together and do Cinematic Titanic, and we said, "Hey, let's do it." So, and it's a more purified, evolved form of Mystery Science Theater. It's more pure, less costumes, no robots. It's just the jokes and the movie and the audience. So
putting it down to its bare bones, and
Yes.
simplicity.
Right. We've stripped it down. We're sucking the marrow out of each bone joke bone, full of getting in there with our spoons, our long spoons, and putting it on bread. And yeah,
You got to schmear.
yeah.
How does it feel? How does it make you feel when you're doing the meet and greets, and you have all these fans coming up to you, and they tell you how much they appreciate you and your characters and how much it means to them? Because I've been to comic book conventions and I've been to your shows before. Battery's going? We'll make this quick. We'll wrap it up.
Battery's going.
Yeah. How does it make you feel? Because I've seen them with robots. I've seen them with crow robots, and they come up and they have you sign them. How does it make you feel that these people love it?
It's fantastic. It's the best thing. We were so isolated from the audience for such a long time, and now to get to meet them and meet families that have, evolved with the show. It's like our kids are into it, and that's the best thing in the world. So yeah, the live shows are great. You'll see tonight a great show.
Oh, awesome.
And I love meeting all the people, and it's terrific.
Well, Mr. Ballou, we greatly appreciate your time. Unfortunately, we have to cut a little bit short because it's almost performing time.
Yeah, we got to go make a show.
And we're also running out of battery power. But we thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate you being here.
20 years, we'll do this again.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Larry Snodie, and this is Interview, and I am sitting here in the Pabst Theater, and I'm sitting with Frank Conniff from Mystery Science Theater 3000 and also from Cinematic Titanic, which is the reason why we're here tonight is because of Cinematic Titanic. Frank, we're very proud to have you here. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm great, thank you, and it's great to be here.
I'm really glad to hear that, and hopefully at the end of the interview, you'll still think that. All right. You were not originally from Minnesota. You're from New York.
Yes, I grew up in Manhattan.
Now, do you think that the fact that you grew up in New York and Manhattan, that you had a different sense of sensibilities comedy-wise, that helped your comedy compared to the Minnesota, the Midwest area?
Well, I think in terms of the other people on Mystery Science Theater, I think we had very similar comedic sensibilities, which is why we worked so well together. And but they did a lot of Wisconsin, Tommy Bartlett,
cheddar cheese,
so a lot of Wisconsin jokes that sometimes had to be explained to me. I'd never heard of Tommy Bartlett before I was hanging out with those guys.
How actually did you get to Minnesota from New York? I mean, that not many people go, I live in New York and Minnesota is the place for me.
Well, if a lot of people in New York, if they knew about Minneapolis, they might say that because it's a great city and it's a much kind of an easier way of life there with all the accoutrements of a smart and sophisticated big city. But I ended up going there because in my youth I had a bit of a drug and alcohol problem. By a bit, I mean a lot, and I was sent to Minnesota to go into drug rehab, of which they have many great drug and rehab facilities. They have a great recovery community there. So I moved there for that, and then I'm like, hey, this is great here. And then I stayed, and then it was like 1985 when at the height of the stand-up comedy boom of the 80s, and Minneapolis had an incredible stand-up comedy scene with a lot of great comedians who I became friends with and I'm friends with to this day. And it was just a wonderful thing, that it was just a serendipitous thing, and then that led to me being on Mystery Science Theater, which was done in Minneapolis. So it was just, the whole thing was just a gigantic blessing.
Well, when you actually were hired for Mystery Science Theater, you were originally hired on just as a writer, from what I understand.
Yes, I was hired as a writer. I think it was in their head that I would, because Josh had already left the show and they hired me, and I think they were considering me seriously to be the mad scientist apprentice, sidekick, but it wasn't. It wasn't set in stone. And then I think there was also some feeling that maybe I would do Servo. But Joel claims, and I don't remember this, Joel claims that I worked the Servo puppet one time, and then that I revealed myself as a horrible puppeteer, and he never wanted me to go near a puppet again. I don't remember that, but that's what Joel says.
When you found out that you were going to be playing TV's Frank, what was the realization when it happened? Did they just come up and go, okay, you're going to do this character? Or what went through your head, man?
Well, they just said, there wasn't any big thing about it. It was just like, I think we did a test or something, and before we started actually filming the shows, and it just felt right, and I didn't even really think that much about it because I was just thrilled to be there as a writer. If they had just had me on as a writer, I still would have been really happy because I consider myself a writer first and foremost, and So so I was just excited about that. And then when I got to be TV's Frank, that was just the cherry on top of the sundae, kind of.
Well, it seems like the more that you were there, the more responsibility you ended up getting. And even after a while, you were picking the movies that they were going to be riffing on. Was there a certain criteria that you had of what movies you wanted to pick on, or something you were looking for?
Certain movies, it's just when you saw them, you knew they were right. It's kind of like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography. You don't know what it is. You can't say what it is, but you know it when you see it. And so some movies, and people always ask, are there movies that are too bad even for Mystery Science Theater? And the answer to that is thousands. There are thousands of movies that are too bad for Mystery Science Theater. Some of them you can't hear the dialogue, you can't see what's going on. Some of them are just so slowly paced that it would be too much of an effort to make them funny. They just have to have that kind of right balance of being really bad, yet there's a story, and yet you can hear and see what's going on most of the time, and also you can't have a lot of dialogue in a movie, because I think they figured out before, in the season or two before I came, I think they figured out that if you do riffs over dialogue, it's not as effective as if you do a riff when there's nothing else being said. Yeah, when there's a space, exactly.
Were there any movies that you wish you could have done, or wish that you would have done?
I remember like I wanted to do Bela Lugosi meets the Brooklyn Gorilla, and because I was obsessed with the comedy team of Sammy Perillo and Duke Mitchell, who were Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis ripoff, but the excitement was not shared by anyone else. And then there were movies that we wanted to do that then we couldn't get the rights to them. Like there was a Elvis movie that came in a batch called Charo. It's a Western, and we screened it, and we riffed like crazy on it. We were having a great time. We were like, this is going to be the great. And I think we were just naive to think that we were ever going to get the rights to an Elvis. Sometimes, who knows how that tape got into the box of the tapes we want. And then there was the Lily Tomlin, John Travolta movie, Moment by Moment. We got that, and then we wanted to do that, but then we couldn't get the rights to it.
Wow, quite an eclectic thing there.
Yeah.
Was there any film that you wish that you guys didn't do? Or that you wish that you could have done it better or taken it back?
Well, I think all of them, you probably, when you look at it, you go, oh, we probably could have come up with a better line for that moment or that moment. But there's no film that I would say, oh, we never should have done that movie. I mean, there were like a couple of the movies we did, like for instance, we did Marooned, which was called Space Travelers. And it had like Gregory Peck and Gene Hackman. It was like a great cast, and it was directed by John Sturges, who's a great director. This is not a great movie, but I'm glad it was fun to do at the time, because just as a change of pace to have actual stars in a movie, But then then there's also a feeling of like, well, you know what, John Sturges is a great filmmaker. Maybe we shouldn't be making
too much fun of him.
Making fun of him, but so stuff like like the some of the movies, like the Sampo movie that might have been The Day the Earth Froze. Okay. Like it wasn't really that bad a movie. It looked kind of beautiful, and it had some like real fantastical, but I think it was just goofy, and so that's why we did it. But I kind of am a believer in like really making fun of bad movies, Okay.
Mm. Well, after MST3K, you ended up working on Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Yes, I did.
Now that's it's a weekly ABC series compared to doing a public. Well, I don't want to say public access, but to a cable show.
Right.
Was there a huge difference in the writing styles for both of those, or?
Well, I think the major, in some ways, it's very similar, because you're sitting in a room with a bunch of other comedy writers, just like on Mystery Science Theater, and you're pitching jokes. But in the case of Sabrina, you're also pitching story ideas and character arcs and act breaks and things like that. It's a different, it uses a different set of tools. But I would say that the main difference in terms of the end product, I mean, Sabrina was a delightful show. A lot of it's a kids show, and kids still love it to this day. It doesn't necessarily reflect my comedic sensibility in the way that Mystery Science Theater does, which completely reflects my comic sensibility. But it was also it's fun to work on something that's not necessarily where you are, but you kind of learn things to do stuff like that that's out of your previous comfort zone, you know.
So you grow as an artist that way.
Well, some people do. I never did, of course, but I've heard of it happening.
Now, I follow you on Facebook, and I also follow you on Twitter, and you're pretty political on a lot of the stuff that you put out there. Now, is that something that you've always been? You've always been pretty political, or is it something that's just come across lately, and you're like, I want to tell people about this? Or
it's been I've always been interested in political things. My dad was a journalist, and he ran for Congress when I was a kid in 1964. So I've always kind of been around it a bit. But as a stand-up comedian, I never did a lot of political stuff because topical material it works great once or twice, and then by a week later it's old news. So when you're developing, at least when I was developing a stand-up act, like I wanted it to be stuff that could really do all over the place and for a length of time. So I didn't do a lot of that kind of stuff in my stand-up. But then when I started posting on Twitter and Facebook, for me, like, it became, I decided, I want to write jokes on Twitter. I want to publish jokes on Twitter, and topical material it really works on Twitter, I find, because because every tweet is forgotten about anyway. Like 5 minutes later, it's like Twitter is so of the moment, So it's a good venue for writing jokes about what's going on, and so when I decided I was going to be writing jokes for Twitter and Facebook, I'm like, well, what am I going to write a joke about? Well, what am I interested in? And that's what I'm reading in the paper that day. That's, every day, even before I started doing it, I was always going to, Talking Points Memo, Huffington Post, Think Progress, Crooks and Line, all my favorite political blogs, and getting all my, and so that's where all my material came from. But then coincidentally, around the same time, I started doing Jimmy Dore's radio show, which is a very political show. And then I'm also doing David Feldman's radio show, which also has a big political bent to it. So I've just kind of fallen into, it's a very natural part of my sensibility, but I've just kind of, fallen into it. Without really planning to.
It just kind of happened.
Just kind of happened, yeah.
And going with it, all right? Going with the flow of the universe, I got it. Now, you're here with Cinematic Titanic. You're back movie riffing. Did it take you a while to get back into the groove, or is it just something that's just natural to you?
I think it comes pretty naturally, I don't remember when we first started it being any kind of, I've got to get back into the groove. We were just all really happy to be working together again, and it was really fun right from the start. And then the unexpected thing was the live shows weren't even a big part of our plan when we started. When we started, we were just going to do DVDs and see what happened, and we ended up doing a live show up at Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas's company. We did a show for them there. That was our first live show ever, and it was an amazing experience, and the audience laughed, and it was great. And then we realized, since we all have a background in stand-up comedy, it felt really natural, and that's another thing that just evolved naturally. That, Cinematic Titanic is really mostly about live performing, you know, and that's what it became. And then we were like booked into a film festival, like not long after that, and we did that, and it was a blast. And then from then on, we just decided, yeah, we really want to do this live all over the place.
How nervous were you on that first one when you guys were at ILM? Right before you go out on the stage, were there butterflies in the stomach?
A little bit, but you know, it was a pretty safe, supportive environment. You know, that's like kind of our perfect crowd for us. You know, they're you know, they were, and they invited us up there. Yeah, they invited us there, so it was a very comfortable thing.
Well, Frank, we really appreciate the time. We thank you so much. If people want to follow you on Facebook or if they want to follow you on Twitter, what do they look up for Twitter?
I guess just go to Twitter /Frank Conniff, and the same thing with Facebook. Just Google in my name
and
look for me. And I'd love to have. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that would be great. And people can now on Facebook you can subscribe. Even if you're not a friend, you can subscribe to status updates. So people want to do that.
All right, Frank, we greatly appreciate your time. We thank you so much.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Larry Snodie, Frank Conniff. I'll be right back. Hey everybody, it's Lawrence Snodie here with Interview, and I am sitting next to one of my personal heroes, and I'm very happy and excited to be sitting next to him after 20 years. I am sitting with Joel Hodson from Mystery Science Theater 3000 and, of course, Cinematic Titanic. How's it going today, Joel?
Great, and we're in Milwaukee today. We're backstage at the Pabst Theater, which is unbelievable. We're sold out tonight, and last night was like an incredible show too, so we're loving it. Life is good right now.
Well, you usually come to the Milwaukee area and you tend to sell out the Pabst Theater a lot. This is like when you come to Milwaukee, this is your home theater, isn't it?
Yeah, well, you know, it's funny, but I'm from Wisconsin, so it's especially nice, and I get to invite a lot of friends from high school and grade school that I knew to come to the show. So it's really, I don't know, somebody up there likes me.
Now you've been doing this you've been doing Cinematic Titanic since 2007, has it been?
It's been 5 years. We're calling it 5 years. I think that's about right.
Well, I mean, first originally you had the Mystery Science Theater 3000, and you left for a while, kind of burnt out from what I understand, and are wanting to go to greener pastures, and you started your own production company with your brother, if I remember
That's
correctly.
Right, yeah.
What are you still working with your brother on any other things, or did that just kind of run its course?
Yeah, we haven't done that since we started doing Cinematic Titanic. My brother Jim is the head of Down Syndrome Los Angeles. They have him and his wife have a son with Down syndrome, and he does an event every year called 20 Wonder, which is the biggest Downs fundraising event in the nation. And so every year, that's usually in July, and I'm going out for that. And that kind of grew out of an event we used to do called Super Bowl.
Okay.
And so while we were working together, one of the things we do to burn off steam and to get to realize our ideas, whether Hollywood was going for them or not, was to do this big party. And so it just kind of grew into this fundraiser, and it's been really successful. I mean, I think he raised $250,000 last year in one night. Yeah.
That is great to hear. That's actually, it's nice to see people giving something back. I mean, you've been blessed with a career and everything, and giving back to it, and along with your brother giving back.
Yeah, I don't have to do too much. I just really have to show up. My brother's wildly creative, and he does almost all of it. I think this year, I believe it's July 7th. It's Saturday, July 7th. I want to encourage people, if they're in LA, to come. I'm going to be wearing the Mystery Science Theater jumpsuit and taking pictures. So if you're in the Mst3K, it might be a good photo op.
Well, now you've been doing Cinematic Titanic for the past 5 years, like we said, and that you're calling it 5 years. What made you decide to come back and do movie riffing? I mean, it's you left for a while and now you're back doing it.
Well, I didn't really want to leave. I wasn't getting along with my partner at Best Brains, so it was the best thing to do at the time. And so I think I shaded it like it was like some other reason other than that, because I didn't really want to hurt the production. I wanted it to keep going. So now I always loved movie riffing. I always wanted to do it again. And at a certain point, after the show, after Mystery Science Theater got over, I noticed something very strange is it started to sell more and more, DVDs after it got off the air. And I just started to think, maybe, we could,
There's still something there.
there's a market there that's not getting served with new content. So that's kind of where it came from. And Trace and Josh and I, who were the guys who came with me to start Mystery Science Theater, we always wanted to work together again. So it just kind of all came together, yeah. And you know what? Tonight's our 99th show. Yeah.
I wish I could have
crazy.
been for the next one.
Let's cut and let's just say it's the 100th show, just so we can say that.
No, we
Okay.
got to be honest. We got to
Okay.
be honest. How do you find the films to use for the shows?
You know what? There's all kinds of sources. We've worked with a couple of different guys who deal in these kind of films, know what we're looking for, and kind of send us lists of stuff. And that's mostly how we do it. And there's half of the movies we license and half of the movies are public domain. And ultimately, they all cost about the same, really, because we have to find a good print, even of a public domain movie. And people, if it's a public domain movie, the chances are that there's been nobody around to care for it.
Right.
So in the event we can find that, it costs the same amount. So it's pretty much the same.
Okay. Well, what kind of criteria do you use to pick a movie to riff on?
It doesn't really matter. It can, I think back at Mystery Science Theater, I think originally I was thinking these would be, science fiction movies, but I think over the course of the show we did all manner of movies and kind of demonstrated you could movie riff on any movie as long as they were being earnest and trying to tell a story. It doesn't work with comedies, really.
Right.
I think there was one, Catalina Caper, I think was considered a movie, but fortunately for us it wasn't funny, and so we were able to do what we do.
It just really took me back. I'm like, yeah, that's. I have to agree with you on that one. It was made funnier by the fact that you guys did it.
Yeah, that's the only comedy I think we ever did.
I think so too. It's been a while since I've.
But I
thought
don't
about
think
it.
when you watch it, you get the impression that it's funny. So it's kind of okay. It's just light. It's like lighthearted, I guess, is the way I'd explain it.
Well, after you get the rights and you know that you're going to be working on a movie, how long does it take to get all the riffing in, and how does that work? Because I mean, you're not all in one studio.
Right. No,
at
we
the
do
beginning.
it all remotely now, and right now we're working. We just got a new movie that we're going to premiere in the middle of July, actually July 5th in Ann Arbor. It'll be our 100th show, and I think it's called The Doll Squad, and it's a Ted V. Mickles movie, and it takes us like about 2 months, I think, from the time we start. I think I was looking at the schedule, and we do it in probably 2 months altogether.
Something to look forward to then. All right.
Yes, there's always something to look forward to.
Okay. Well, I know that you're very busy. In fact, we're sitting here a couple of minutes before the doors open up. So we're kind of rushed in, but we thank you for your time. We thank you very much for talking to us.
Absolutely. You got a lot of people to talk to today.
Oh,
Everybody's waiting
yes.
to talk, and we got about 20 minutes to do it.
But I do want to ask one question. What made you decide to do a tour of Cinematic Titanic instead of just being in the studio and doing all the riffing and just taking it live?
It is very interesting the way it worked out. I got invited to come up to ILM and do an event up there, and I just said to them, hey, you know what, we're starting this thing called Cinematic Titanic. Wouldn't it be cool if we came up there and did our show? And so it kind of dovetailed with our studio production of Cinematic Titanic. So we shot our show in LA. That weekend we went up to San Francisco, did 2 shows at ILM in their premiere theater, and something really unusual happened. We did a lot better when we were doing it live, and we were funnier. We were actually like rising to the occasion, and we were working it a little more. So so much came out of it that we actually went back to LA and added those jokes, all these new jokes we had gotten to in front of people, and it became really clear that doing it live is more fun for us and more fun for the audience. And we kind of feel like it's the state of the art of movie riffing right now. So we love it. Go out like probably twice a month on the average. I think 24 shows. Yeah, it shakes out to about 24, 20, maybe 20 shows. If we've done it
It's about
5 years,
twice a month.
if we've done it 5 years and there's 100 shows, it's about 20, right? Yeah. I'm just doing that all in my head in front of you with the camera running.
And you got more shows coming in than later, so the number will actually go up.
Yeah, that's right. It'll actually go up. So, but you know, I think that's pretty good that I did that division.
I would applaud, but I've got a microphone.
Okay,
in my hand,
see, it's all there, bud.
Golf clap. There we go.
All right. Thanks.
No, thank you, Joel. We really appreciate the time. Thank you so much. We wish you the greatest success with Cinematic Titanic.
Thanks for coming down up from Chicago. That's awesome.
And ladies and gentlemen, this is Interview. Larry Snodie, Joel Hansen. One of us will be right back.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.